Sometimes even good people can make a mistake. And when it happens, it's one of the most intense and emotional experiences of your life. It could be a DUI, or maybe you were in the wrong place with the wrong people at the wrong time. Or perhaps you just did something stupid at the spur of the moment without even thinking, and now you're in trouble with the law. Well, you need experienced legal help right away so you don't become a victim of the criminal justice system. Even good people can make a mistake, and if you, a friend, or loved one has been accused of a crime, don't make another mistake by hiring the wrong attorney for the kind of help you need. You need to visit toddjohnslaw.com. That's toddjohnslaw.com, and then call Attorney Todd Johns today. Attorney Todd Johns has decades of experience helping good people like you who have made mistakes or bad decisions and will stand by you every step of the way. toddjohnslaw.com.
Welcome to That's Enough Out of You. I am your host, Bill Rader, and joining me this week, as he does every week on That's Enough Out of You, is Sean Kane. Sean, what's going on?
Billy Raids, how you doing, buddy?
Hey, you can't complain. We're doing pretty good. Sean, before we get to our topic this week, I want to mention a few things. Couple things I want to get to real quick before we get to our topic. The first is a few weeks ago, we recorded our Q&A episode with David Whelan, who is the author of Mind Games, The Assassination of John Lennon. A lot of information in that show. Now, that show is exclusively on our Patreon. So if you want to see it, you have to join our Patreon and you have to become a paid member of Patreon. And you might be saying, well, geez, I don't have a heck of a lot in my budget to join another paid service. Well, it's $1 a month. $1 a month to start. You know, if you are interested in that, can't get any cheaper than that. So $1 a month, that's a heck of a lot cheaper than any other streaming service out there, and you get some good shows. We have our weekly Patreon show called Speakeasy that's on there, and then of course you want to make sure and see that David Whelan episode, because it really was great. It was a lot of good information that he gave. Actually brought in some new information that he had just learned about the assassination. So make sure you look us up on Patreon. Of course, there'll be links here and on YouTube and on our podcast feed and everywhere. So there's on Facebook, you'll be able to find our Patreon. Make sure you look it up, you subscribe. And the other thing that I wanted to talk about is on YouTube. If you're watching us on YouTube, first of all, thank you. If you could hit that subscribe button, we are getting very, very, very close to a milestone of 500 subscribers, which is really important for us. So if you please could hit that subscribe button, we would really appreciate it. It will help us out quite a bit, help out the show. The other thing I wanted to mention about our YouTube is, you know, relatively speaking, we don't get a ton of comments. We usually get somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 to 30 or 40 comments per episode, sometimes less than that. But the nice thing about that is that Sean and I preview each one of those comments. We get to see them all. And I just, you know, most of them are great comments, very good feedback, great conversation. Even if you have a differing opinion, we welcome you to comment there. The only thing we're not going to tolerate is when you attack us or one of our guests personally. That's just childish and it's stupid, and we're just going to delete that. Don't even bother if you're thinking, hey, I'm gonna insult somebody or I'm gonna attack somebody. It's not gonna last very long. So don't even bother. And if we see it happening multiple times with the same person, you're just gonna get banned. I mean, we're not going to
tolerate it.
No,
it's called for childish, and we're just not going to let our guests have to deal with that.
Right. So, but other than that, you know, we've actually had some guests that we've met through the YouTube comments. So, you know, we welcome you to comment and again, subscribe, click the notification bell or whatever it is. I know everybody says that on their YouTube channel, but please do that. help us out a lot. And, it's a good way for you to show your support. It's an easy way. It's free. And then, of course, the Patreon is the other way. So, Sean, anything you want to add to that?
Just, check out our website and our merchandise store, bookshop, if you want to buy any of the books or the authors we have on. And then on our social media, we welcome comments on there. You want to engage in conversation on there, that helps our algorithm. So that'll be great. And like I said, just keep them, reasonable. I mean, if you got a criticism, that's fine. We'll talk about that, but there's no reason for personal attacks, especially on our authors. We're not going to deal with that, or our guests. We're just not going to allow that. So, just be an adult. That's all we ask.
Absolutely. All right, Sean, really, really good. Great topic today. So let's get to it. We're going to be talking about the commission, the Mafia commission. And I know you got a lot of notes on that, Sean. So why don't we get started?
Well, Billy, we mentioned the commission so much on the show, but we just haven't done an episode with it. And when we're talking about the commission, we're talking about the 5 families in New York. And, they're like a, board of directors kind of a corporation, and they overseen the entire syndicate nationwide. And, it started off that the bosses were all Sicilian born, American Cosa Nostra, and then it, developed to, they were all American born. But they worked with, we talk about the Jewish gangster, the Irish gangster, they work, with them. The one thing today, Billy, the commission today is really just, it's strictly New York thing. Like the 5 families today, Billy, are actually run, like each family's run by a kind of a commission itself. Like there's 3 or 4 guys running it to kind of make it a little harder for the government to go after them. They're not what they used to be. Matter of fact, there hasn't been a confirmed like organized hit by the Mafia in years in New York. Even the Gambino, one of the Gambino bosses, Collie, that was hit. That was like a domestic situation that had nothing to do really with organized crime. So I mean, they're just not the power of the Mafia, and we're going to discuss what happened to them, and this is why they are in the shape that they are today. But the first thing I want to say, Billy, when we talk about the 5 families, we're going to mention them by name, and the names really are given by the FBI for some of the bosses that they wanted to represent each family. And the families itself, the members and stuff, they didn't really call themselves like, the Gambino family or whatever. Some did, but most of them didn't, but the 5 families are the Bonanno family, the Colombo family, the Gambino, the Genovese, and the Lucchese. They're the 5 families. And the Gambino and the Genovese have been the most powerful. Okay. The Bonannos have probably been the most troublesome. They've even lost, their seat for a while on the commission. And each family has, infamous gangsters in each family and stuff. We're going to discuss them all, and we're going to go through, each family, and we're going to kind of go through the bosses of each family, but we don't have time to go through every single one. So we're just going to name like the big ones and discuss the big events. So basically the families, actually, each family in New York actually goes back before the commission was formed. But in 1931, Lucky Luciano, the boss of what would become the Genovese family, would form the commission, and he would break it up into the 5 families, and they would oversee the families across the country. So Chicago, I know there was a great series, Billy, with Michael Imperioli from The Sopranos, and they had a History Channel. It was very good. There was a couple things though I disagreed with. So there were some things there like they contradict them. Like they had somebody say that when the commission was first set up, it was the 5 families. It was Chicago with Capone, and then the Buffalo family, which I don't agree with. It's strictly a New York 5 families thing. And we talked about Capone. Luciano didn't want to let him in. So, and then right after that, Imperioli says that it was strictly a New York thing. So they kind of contradicted their own show. So I didn't understand that. But Luciano does set it up in 1931. And it was really because of the Maranzano Masseria War. And this has a lot to do with drugs, Billy, and we're going to talk about that because the fallacy that's out there is that the mob doesn't get involved in drugs, and we know the policy was, it wasn't don't do drugs, it's just don't get caught selling.
Don't get caught, yeah.
And we're going to talk about, specifically the Bonanno family and what key they had with Sicily. So we're going to get into that. But each family goes back before the commission. So let's start there, Billy. Let's start with the Bonanno family. So the first boss of the Bonanno family was Stefano Magaddino, and he was from 1915 to 1920. He was the boss, and then he would move to Buffalo, Billy, and he would kind of have his own family in Buffalo. Okay, and that's why a lot of people, I think that he was on the commission, but he wasn't one of the 5 bosses. Once he moved to Buffalo became one of the 26 Cosa Nostra families. Okay, so the first real boss, powerful boss, is Salvatore Maranzano. Okay, and he became boss in 1931, and this is what happens. He gets in a war with Joe the Boss Masseria, who he become the boss of the Genovese family, and they get in a massive war, Billy. So it's all across New York, famous war. There's bodies dropping all over the place. And what Lucky Luciano does, Billy, is he takes them both out essentially. Okay, and one of the reasons he did is because he wanted to get the families involved more into drugs. In the old, what they call the mustache Pete's, they didn't want to get involved in that. So once he takes out Maranzano and Masseria, then it kind of, the younger bucks take over, and this is where Luciano comes in and forms the commission. So after Maranzano, that's where Joe Bonanno takes over. Joe Bonanno runs the family that would later get his name from the FBI. So this is very important, Billy. What he would do is he would send one of his young capos over to Sicily, and that capo's name was Carmine Galante. Okay, very important capo at the time, and he would go over to Sicily and form an alliance with the Sicilian Mafia. And what they would do is they would start bringing in heroin into the United States. And at the beginning of the heroin distribution in the United States, 90% of it ran through the commission, Billy. So that right there tells you stop about the mob doesn't get involved in drugs, because Galante was bringing it in. They had a relationship with the Sicilians, and this relationship is going to really impact the Bonanno family for years.
DK's Corner has moved. Come see us in our brand new location at 201 Cherry Street in Jessup, Pennsylvania, right across from the Jessup Plaza. Enjoy a brand new menu with hot and cold sandwiches, soups, salads, pizza, delicious breakfast, including breakfast bowls and sandwiches, specialty coffees, and DK's famous Razzle Dazzle flavor shaken espressos, and still the best cheesesteaks around. Follow DK's Corner on Facebook and Instagram, or call them at 570-209-0278 to find out about their daily specials and catering. And DK's Corner now has beautiful outdoor seating for the summer. Don't feel like leaving the house? Call DK's Corner for delivery. And we thank DK's Corner for sponsoring That's Enough Out of You. DK's Corner. That's Enough Out of You is sponsored by Carfecta, Scranton's premier destination for finding the vehicle of your dreams. With a commitment to service, value, and selection, Carfecta is your trusted partner in every step of your auto purchase journey. Our sales staff will work with you to select the perfect vehicle from our diverse inventory. Our friendly office staff will assist you in securing financing and offering warranties. At Carfecta, our dedicated team is here to make your car buying experience seamless and satisfying. Located in Scranton, Pennsylvania at 220 South 7th Avenue, or call us at 272-770-0080 and check us out on Facebook. With years of experience serving the area, our dealership is dedicated to offering high-quality pre-owned vehicles to our customers. From the moment you walk through our door, we're committed to providing you with a great car buying experience. With our skilled sales staff and financing options, we'll help you get the vehicle you want at the great price you deserve. Visit Carfecta today and let us exceed your expectations. Are you thinking about selling your house? Well, Bob Connors, a realtor at Christian Saunders Real Estate, says, I can't sell your house, but I sure as heck can market it and get it from sell to sold. Call Bob today for great marketing and to get a ton of eyeballs on your house. Are you in the market to buy a home? Not sure where to start? If it looks like something you shouldn't buy, Bob's going to tell you that. Think you can't buy a house or have no idea where to start? Been there, done that. Bob will get you going in the right direction. You can reach Bob at 570-614-3624 or 570-335-9000. And you can find Bob on Facebook at Bob Connors-Realtor. Whether you call Bob or not, please remember, stay awesome, all you awesome humans, and be kind to each other. Bob Connors, the realest real estater. And thanks to Bob Connors and Christian Saunders Real Estate for sponsoring That's Enough Out of You.
What happens is Joe Bonanno would get into a lot of beefs with the other bosses of the five families, okay? And basically, he would be opposed by all the commission members because it came out that he was plotting against them, and they would actually have him removed from his seat on the commission. And what happens is a guy by the name of Rusty Rastelli takes over. But the problem with Rusty Rastelli is he was always in the can. He was always arrested. So he always tried to run the family from prison, and that really doesn't work out well. So what happens is Bonanno's capo that he sent over there, Carmine Galante, he just he gets out of jail because he was arrested for heroin distribution. So when he gets out of jail, Billy, he just says, I'm not listening to Rastelli. I'm not respecting him as the boss. I'm the boss. And Carmine Galante just, without a commission okay, says that he's the boss of the Bonanno family. And the FBI started to recognize him as the boss. So a lot of what's called mob historians recognize Carmine Galante as the boss, but he was never officially given that title by the commission. Okay. And what happens is he brings over with him a lot of the Sicilian gangsters from Sicily that they named the Zips. They call them the Zips. And they would be his bodyguards. They would be the guys, that would be his enforcement, his muscle in trying to take over the Bonanno family. And which he did. I mean, in a sense, he just basically said, I'm the boss and nobody's going to confront me on that. But what happens with him, Billy, is the other bosses of the families were mad because Galante had this relationship we talked about with the Sicilian gangsters. He was making all this money on heroin, and he wasn't sharing with the other bosses. So that's a big beef with all the bosses. So what happens is they get together and they go to the Zips that were protecting Galante, and they basically say, hey, we'll pay you this, you take him out, you take over his action, stuff like that. So they turn on him. And in the famous picture, Billy, I'm sure you've seen it, Galante's up on the rooftop restaurant and he gets gunned down and he's got the cigar in his mouth. I'm sure you see that picture, they gunned them down.
Yeah.
And officially Rusty Rastelli, he was always the boss. But now he actually went to the commission to get the okay to have Galante taken out. And then what happens with Rastelli, Billy, is the Donnie Brasco mess. So Donnie Brasco was an FBI informant whose real name was Joe Pistone, or not an informant, but an FBI agent whose name was Joe Pistone, who went undercover in the Bonanno family. Okay. And what happens, Billy, is he really hammers the mafia. He forms a relationship with Sonny Black, who was a capo, and of course the great movie with Johnny Depp and Al Pacino. And this is a crushing blow to the Bonanno family. So what happens is the rest of the five families vote to have the Bonannos removed from their seat on the commission after this fiasco, because not only did Sonny Black, he introduced Donnie Brasco to bosses from all over the country. He introduced them to Santo Trafficante. And of course, they put that in the movie, if you recall,
Right.
down in Florida. And what happens is a guy by the name of Joe Messino, who lived in Queens, and he lived close to John Gotti, who would eventually take over the Gambino family and form a friendship with him. But Messino did a lot of this dirty work for the family. He was the guy that kind of put together the actual mechanics of the hit on Galante, and then he would also take out a lot of the guys like Sonny Black, that because of the fiasco with Donnie Brasco. So what would happen with Messino is he would eventually be raised to the level of boss, and he would later take over the Bonanno family, and it would be a disaster, Billy, because he would eventually turn informant. In 2005, he would turn informant, crushing blow, seating a boss on a commission, and he turns informant, Billy. And that was really the crushing blow to Mafia. I mean, you could talk about Gotti, sure, but once Messino turns, Billy, he was really the last sitting boss, and then the Mafia was crushed after that.
Yeah. Sean, let me go back, because
Go
this was, we're talking about 80s now, right? 80s and
right. And that was just, Bill, that was just a quick, I'm going through the Bonanno family. I'm going to do that for each family, just go through, but go ahead.
So, no, well, I kind of want to go back to the beginning of the commission, the formation of the commission.
Sure.
And ask you, was there, and I'm sure there was nothing written down, but was there sort of a charter? Was there like were there rules? Were there,
Sure.
is there like an organizational hierarchy where
Sure.
everybody kind of knew, all right, this is the top guy, and then these are the people underneath?
Great question. So so what Luciano, when he set it up, Billy, he would set up the 5 families. And what he would do is they would have the authority to approve new members from other families. They would actually break up the territory. So basically, we got Brooklyn, you got Queens, you guys got the Bronx, stuff like that. And then they would do that for families across the country, like Milwaukee and the outfit in Chicago, who would eventually kind of run parallel to the commission. We talked about this with Ricardo, but they would approve bosses. Like, that's what people don't understand when they're talking about the JFK assassination, like Trafficante, Marcello. They still had an answer to New York. Those guys were bosses of their own family, but they can't be doing things that affected the commission, the syndicate at a national level without the approval of the commission. So yeah, Bill, there wasn't anything written on paper, but there was rules when members were inducted, soldiers were inducted. They would have to be, they'd be told, because they'd be trained, Billy, they'd have somebody sponsoring them who would train them on the rules. And when they're coming up, they would understand, okay, this is what you have to do. This is what you can't do. This is what absolutely isn't allowed at all. So they would understand that while they're, before they become a made man, they would understand the rules. But as far as the commission rules, I mean, it was really coming out from Luciano. He was the mastermind of setting up the 5 families in 1931.
Yeah.
And they would have the 26 families, Billy, across the country, which is interesting now, Billy, because if you look at those 26 families, I mean, you got the 5 in New York are still there. Maybe you got North Jersey, right? Philly, I don't know, because the guy who they claim is the sitting boss has a podcast. So I don't know if we want to say the Philly mob is still out.
But they
Rhode Island.
I'm surprised they don't have podcasts at this point.
Well, Rhode Island, I guess, would have a little bit activity in Boston, but some of the big families like Carlos Marcello in New Orleans is gone, Trafficante in Florida is gone, the Los Angeles mob is gone. The outfit in Chicago is still there. They're still active, but they got hit with their own charges. They got hammered. The bosses all went to prison there. So, I mean, but yeah, most of the families, Bill, there's probably only 8 or 9 active now, counting the 5 in New York. maybe
Right.
10 at the most, Billy.
Yeah. And then the other thing is, Sean, it wasn't just Italians who were part of the commission, right? I mean, there were Jewish gangsters that were part of the commission also.
No, that's a fallacy, Billy. That's a fallacy. To actually sit on the commission, you would have to be a boss of one of the 5 families. That's where I disagree with a lot of historians, Billy.
Okay.
Now Meyer Lansky would have the ear of Lucky Luciano. He would kind of be like, and this, we talked about this with Russell Buffalino in Pittston, would have a lot of power and sway with the commission. But the
Okay.
commission, and this is, what I kind of I didn't understand what they were going with in the documentary. Commission is strictly the 5 bosses of the Bonanno family, the Colombo family,
okay.
the Gambino, Genovese, and Lucchese. They sit at
Okay.
the directors. Nobody else could sit in those chairs, Billy.
Okay.
Each
Gotcha.
member has to be approved by the full commission. You have to vote on it.
Right.
So that's why Carmine Galante was never officially the boss of the Bonanno family, even though historians put him there. Like I've seen that on so many, like they'll list all the bosses and they have Galante there. He was never officially the boss. He just said I just claimed to be the boss. And he was actually running it like he was the boss, like he was actually, but he never officially was given that title by the commission. So no,
Okay.
nobody else would sit on that. But there was people that would have a lot of say with the commission, Billy.
Yeah.
A lot of people would have, like Jimmy Burke would, when he was in New York with the Lucchese family, we'll talk about him later. He would have a lot of sway with the commission because he was very close with Polivario, who was very close with the boss.
Right. Okay.
So there would be instances like that, but no, the 5 families the 5 bosses sit at the head of the table.
Okay. All right. Makes sense. All right. So go ahead. Go to the next family that you're going to talk about.
Well, the next family is interesting, Billy. That's the Colombo family. And, their first real important boss was Joe Profaci. And a lot of times they call it the Profaci family. I'm sure you heard it called that. Not, but the FBI started to call it the Colombo family. But Joe Profaci was a very smart gangster, Billy. He wasn't well liked because he was, he was kind of greedy. But he was like the olive oil king, kind of similar to the Godfather in the movie.
Right. Vito.
And like I said, he wasn't well liked. And what happened, Billy, is he got into a war with the Gallo brothers, Crazy Joey Gallo and his brothers, Larry and Albert. And the thing is, the Gallo brothers were crazy, but they were in their neighborhood, Billy. They were superstars. They were like Robin Hood in their neighborhood. And these guys, we see Profaci making all this money and everything. And these guys were kind of struggling. They weren't making a lot of money compared to what a lot of these other gangsters were. And they didn't recognize Profaci as the boss. They wanted to take over. So what they did is they started a war. They started a war with Profaci. And they kidnap a bunch of his guys, including one name that would later become the boss, Joe Colombo. And they kind of hold them for ransom and they threaten to kill them if Profaci doesn't give them the due and the respect that they feel they deserve. So anyway, what happens, Billy, is eventually Crazy Joe's brothers convince him that the best course of action is to let these guys go. But the war continues, Billy. Crazy Joe goes to jail. And when he's in jail, he forms an alliance with a lot of the black gangsters. Nicky Barnes was one of them. And what happens is when he comes out of jail, Profaci's already gone. He passes away. And Joe Colombo is made boss of the Colombo family. So what happens is Joey Gallo gets out and he doesn't recognize Colombo as the boss either. And he continues that war he had with Profaci. And Colombo was making a lot of enemies from the other members of the commission, Billy, because how he became boss, Billy, is he found a plot. Joe Bonanno came to him with a plot that he wanted to take over the commission and to get rid of some of the other bosses. And what Colombo did is instead of siding with Bonanno, he went to Carlos Gambino and some of the other bosses and told them what Bonanno was planning. So that's why they kind of kick him off, Bonanno. And then Colombo becomes the boss later on. But the problem is that Colombo gets involved in the Italian Civil Rights League, and he was so worried about the stereotype that was on Italians about all Italians being gangsters and everything. And the thing is, he was angering the other bosses, Joe, especially like Carlo Gambino, because they want to stay in the shadows. And the last thing they want to hear is a boss, a public boss like that, having rallies where he's at thousands of people.
Right.
He's on the air, and you see this in the series The Offer about the Godfather.
Yeah.
See that play out. So at one of the rallies, what happens is Columbo's shot by this black gangster Johnson, and then he's shot, and nobody knows why Johnson did it, but everybody speculates that it was Crazy Joey Gallo. But to me, Billy, Crazy Joe had to have the okay from one of the other bosses like Gambino. You know what I'm saying? Like they're not. I think at this point, Crazy Joe realized that if he's going to take on Colombo, he's going to need an okay. And I think Gambino was so upset with Colombo because they had a big falling out. Only like a week before, they had a meeting, and they had a huge falling out because Gambino asked them to stop this Italian Civil Rights League. Like, you have to stop this because it's too public. It's bringing heat down on us that we don't need. And Colombo said he wasn't stopping. And they basically had words, Billy. So I think, and a lot of historians think that too, that Gambino gave the okay to Gallo. And then Gallo used his friendship that he developed in prison with the black gangsters and had this guy Johnson take out Colombo, but he didn't die. He was in a coma, Billy, for a long time. He didn't die instantly. And then eventually what happens is they name Carmine the Snake Persico as the boss, and he would take over, and he would have a long run until eventually Vic Orena would take over, and that would be a disaster. But Persico would be the boss for a long, long time. And he would eventually go to jail in the commission trial. And we'll talk about the commission trial later when they got all the bosses. And that was in the mid-'80s. And that basically was when, the Mafia, was crushed, really. That was the beginning of the end for the Mafia. So before we go out to the next family, anything you want to discuss on the Colombos?
No, just, obviously, that, like you said, that is a big part of what you see in that series, The Offer. We talked about that before. We actually did an episode covering that series, and a lot of some of those things were changed for just for time's sake. But I think you did a pretty good job summing it up there.
And we would like to thank our sponsor, Gracious Day Grains. Sean, you like to eat healthy, don't you?
Always, buddy. I try to eat healthy as much as I can.
Yeah, and there is nothing healthier than what they call like farm to table, right? So when you can get something right from the ground and make it and then put it right on your table. And Gracious Day Grains, they have a tremendous selection, and it's totally organic. Everything is, they don't use any sort of herbicides or pesticides or anything like that. They have a bunch of different products on their website, Gracious Day Grains. So if you go to graciousdaymilling.com, you'll find a bunch of great stuff there, Sean.
Yeah, you will, Billy. And it's owned by Tom Maxey, who's a great guy from Virginia. He's a truth seeker, just like me and you, buddy. And Tom's growing philosophy follows the wisdom of farmers of centuries past. And a quote from Tom is, "If we practice the right rotations, we exclude the bugs and weeds without needing herbicides or pesticides." So, this is great, Billy. What he's doing is fantastic.
There's cornbread mix, there's cornmeal, popcorn he sells, buckwheat Sean, have you had buckwheat pancakes?
No, buddy.
Oh they're delicious. I love buckwheat pancakes. And Gracious Day Grains sells buckwheat pancakes. Just go to their website and you'll be able to find all of this stuff there. You can order it right off the website. You can find out all about how they farm and their whole philosophy, Tom's philosophy. It's great stuff.
It really is, Billy. And one of the things he does is he grinds small batches at very low temperatures, which retains the flavor and the freshness.
Of course. And it, I mean, it can't get any fresher than that. I mean, it's literally right from the ground. So again, go to graciousdaymilling.com and just, take a look on there. You can order whatever you want and they'll send it right to your door. I mean, again, it doesn't get any fresher than that, right from Tom's farm to your door to your table. So
absolutely. And eat healthy and you'll feel better.
Absolutely. I wish I could do that. I wish I could eat healthier, Sean.
We'll start with Tom's stuff, buddy.
I'm going to order some of those buckwheat pancakes. I love
There you go. I'm going to try them too, Billy.
Yeah, they're really good. All right. Gracious Day. We thank Gracious Day Grains for their sponsorship.
Thank you.
That's Enough Out of You is also sponsored by Case Quattro Winery, featuring over 20 flavors of wine, from dry red, dry white, and fruit for your sampling pleasure. Case Quattro Winery offers entertainment, parties, and private events, now serving a full menu with a little something for everyone, including appetizers, salads, dinners, pizza, and desserts. Case Quattro has some of the best live entertainment in the area, with comedy and karaoke nights and live bands. Check us out on Facebook and Instagram for all of our upcoming events. And if you mention the code OUTA, that's OUTTA, you get 15% off of your order. Located on Main Street in Peckville, Pennsylvania, call 570-382-3855 for more information. And we thank Case Quattro Winery for their support.
Yeah, and the next family we're going to discuss, Bill, the Gambino family. We're not going to go into too much detail because we had a whole episode on this. If people want to go,
Yep.
What was the one called about? That's No Diplomat.
Right.
Name of
That's
the episode with Paul Castellano.
yep.
So basically, the Gambinos, Bill, have been, like I said earlier, with the Genovese family. They've been the two most powerful. Those two families, most active on the commission. The two families that had a lot of impact with other families across the country. Like a lot of them would have to answer to the Gambino and Genovese. They would have a lot of impact on that. Their first boss, really going back, Salvatore D'Aquila, in 1928, he was shot to death, and Vincent Magnano would take over, and he would be killed, Billy, by the gangster that everybody knows, Albert Anastasia, that we talked about on this show. And he would be the boss, and he would be gunned down, Billy, in the famous picture in the barber chair. He was sitting,
barbershop.
yeah, and he'd be gunned down in a barbershop. And that was orchestrated by one of his up-and-coming capos, Carlo Gambino. And who did Carlo Gambino go to do that hit, Billy? The Gallo brothers. So that, to me, establishes the relationship that he would later use to take out Joe Colombo. He would go back to the Gallo brothers to take him out. And then that would be in 1957. And then that would lead to Appalachian, the meeting where all the bosses from the five families and bosses from across the country would get together in New York, and they would eventually, it would be raided by the police when they see all these cars pulling up and all these bosses, and that had a lot to do with it, Billy, because a lot of people were worried about that when Anastasia's taken out. And there was other reasons for that meeting too, Billy. There was a lot going on, Vito Genovese, he had a lot to do with that meeting, Billy, because we're going to talk about that with Joe Valachi, the first guy to really turn a foreman. And that was another big reason. So we'll talk about that when we get to the Genovese family. But Carlo Gambino would take over, and he would be in the shadows, Billy. And he was very dangerous. He's very sneaky. Like he would really turn on a lot of people, Billy. You see how very devious he was. And he would have a very strong reign, though. He would stay in the shadows. He would build the Gambinos up to the most powerful family in the country. They probably had the most members, and they were a powerhouse. His mistake is, and we talked about this before, on his deathbed, he names his brother-in-law, Paul Castellano, as the boss. And that leaves this war with John Gotti. John Gotti would later take him out. And then, of course, Gotti goes to prison. We covered that whole thing, so we're not going to talk about that. And after that, the Gambinos, John had his son trying to be acting boss for a while, had his brothers. There was different guys trying to run things, but once Gotti went to prison, Bill, the Gambino family was a shadow of what it once was. And it goes back to, Carlo making Castellano the boss. That was the choice that really, he should have made Aneely Della Croce, who was his underboss.
Right.
Should have made him boss. And we talked about that, how
Yeah.
things changed.
And Gambino was really what they called the boss of bosses, right? He was the capo.
They called him that, they did call him that, Billy. But I think, to me personally, the only boss of bosses was Luciano.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, he was the only recognized, because when he set it up as he's the boss of bosses. So he's the one controlling everything. But then later on, everybody would kind of have their own power. So even though officially, I don't think he was the boss of bosses, but he was the most powerful. When he was sitting there, he had the most impact of all the bosses. So let's put it that way, Billy. But officially, there was really no boss of bosses, just Luciano.
Yeah.
So anything before we move on?
Oh, let's keep going.
So the next family is the Genovese family, and they were, at times just as powerful as the Gambinos. At other times, more powerful than the Gambinos. Very secretive family, Billy. There's a period there where the FBI couldn't pin down who was actually their boss, and this is where a lot of people think Russell Buffalino became acting boss of the Genovese family. And we talked about that.
Yeah.
But it goes back to Peter Morello he was a boss earliest, like 1909, Billy. And he went to jail in 1922. And then Joe the Boss Masseria takes over. And he gets into the war with Maranzano, or I'm sorry, Masseria. I pronounced that wrong. And they have the war that goes on, and Luciano eventually takes them all out, Billy. And he takes over as boss in 1931, sets up the commission. But in 1936, he's convicted of running a prostitution racket, Billy. And we talked about this in the Jewish mob episode. What happens is, with Project Underworld, he goes to Lansky. And like you were talking about earlier, Bill, about Jewish gangsters sitting at the table. Officially, no, but I know what you're saying, because, Luciano would, when he's in prison, he would go to Lansky to kind of speak for him. So I understand what you're saying, but officially, no, Lansky was never sitting at the table as a boss, but Luciano would go to him as his go-to guy, and he would be deported to Italy. He would die in 1962, and the family would be taken over by Frank Costello. Now, Costello was like the prime minister of organized crime. They thought he was very active with politicians. This is why the rumor he was friends with Joe Kennedy. There's nothing other than Costello's word on that I don't see any evidence of that. I think Jim DiEugenio proved that that's just all hearsay. But Costello did have a lot of power, Billy, in politics. He had a lot of friends in politics. And what happens is one of his capos, Vito Genovese, his underboss actually, wants to take over the family. So he goes to a young uppercomer by the name of Vincent the Chin Gigante, who would later become the Oddfather, walking around pretending.
Bathrobe.
Yeah. And a young Gigante would shoot Costello. But the thing is, here's the interesting story about that, Bill. There's a lot of backstory with that. Gigante actually loved Costello, and he didn't want to do it, but Genovese kind of forced his hand. So when he shot, he actually missed on purpose, and he just kind of grazed his head. And you see the famous picture with Costello. He's got a bandage around his head and everything. And they would later become friends, really good friends, if you could believe that. Gigante would tell Costello that, I'm sorry about what happened, and Costello would actually forgive him. And Gigante later on becomes boss. We'll talk about that. But what happens is Costello says, you know what? I'm walking away. Vito, you could have it. So Vito Genovese takes over. And Vito Genovese was an animal, Billy. He was really violent. He turned to violence. He'd have a lot of guys killed. And the biggest problem he had is one of his soldiers, Joe Valachi, turns on him. And the reason he turned on him is because they were in prison together, and Valachi thought that Genovese was going to have him killed. And he ends up turning informant, Billy. In this famous hearings, he comes out and he tells all the secrets about the mafia, how they operate, the families. He gave them all the information. And that's why we have a lot of this information. And we know about the 26 families, and we know a lot of that comes from Joe Valachi. He gave a lot of this information. And then what happens is Genovese goes to jail, and he'll die in prison in 1969. And this is where there's this big gap, Billy, where we don't know who's running the Genovese family for about 12 years. There's different names that pop up, but a lot of people think it was Buffalino. But there's a lot of people that don't believe that too. But if you go on the book, with Billy D'Elia, he said Buffalino was the acting boss. So, who knows? But then here's where it gets tricky, Billy, because then the FBI recognizes Fat Tony Salerno as the boss. And a lot of people think that Salerno was actually the front for Vincent Gigante, and that Vinny the Chin was actually the boss and Salerno was the front boss. Now, me personally, Billy, what I think, there's one tape that later on Salerno, they have him on tape, and he's saying something about some guy's complaining to him, and he's saying, "We'll go talk to the boss. Don't talk to me."
Right,
So that
yeah.
they realize, you know what I'm saying? So, but what I
Yeah.
think happened is I think Salerno was the boss. I think he was the official boss, and I think he stepped away towards the end and kind of just became a front man. But Salerno was very powerful. He ran he was making so much money in gambling operations in New York, Billy, in Harlem. He had a lot of deals with the black gangsters in Harlem, and he was making a ton of money, Billy, ton of money. So he was very powerful, even if he wasn't considered a boss. But then Gigante would take over, and what happens is in 1985, Fat Tony Salerno gets indicted on a commission trial. So he gets indicted as the boss anyway. And Carmine the Snake Persico gets indicted. Rusty Rastelli. Oh, Tony Ducks Corallo. They would all get indicted, and along with Paul Castellano. Now, Castellano would, Rastelli was actually in prison, and Bonanno at that time, they've lost their seating. So Castellano would end up getting whacked by Gaddy. So the only guys that actually went to prison on that would have been Corallo and Fat Tony Salerno and Persico. They would all go to prison in the commission trial, and that would be, a crushing blow to the mafia.
Well, isn't it true that after that they made some kind of a decision that they were never going to officially meet again? That that they were going to expand the commission, but they just weren't going to meet.
They weren't going to meet in public. They had a meeting because they had the meeting and they got it on film.
Right.
All these guys showing up, Castellano and Salerno, and and that's when they started to get the idea of maybe we should have what do you call it? Like a commission actually running each family, like 3-4 members in charge.
Right.
And but Vincent Gigante would take over officially, and they would get him too, and he would be infamous walking around in a bathrobe, mumbling, saying he has mental problems and everything, and that was all an act.
Yeah.
But that commission trial pretty much changed the way, and this is where they started to become they have less control over the families across the country, Billy, because they couldn't even, they can't meet with each other. They can't control what's going on even in New York. So they can't control what's going on in the rest of the United States. So that trial really hit them hard, Billy.
And RIco had a lot to do with that also, right? Because
RIco had everything to do with it.
Yeah, everything. Because if they could, even link them together in any way possible, they could charge them all. So.
That's why Bobby Kennedy could never get to the commission, because he could never get them. It was before RIco.
Right.
Because they were so hidden and so insulated.
Yeah.
But once they had RIco, that's how they nailed them all. And once they get them meeting, Billy, once they get a picture of all these guys showing up meeting, now they got them nailed,
Exactly.
So the last family, Bill, that we're going to talk about is the Lucchese family. And of course, they become infamous in the movie Goodfellas. And it's ironic, their most infamous member is probably a guy who wasn't really a member, and that's Jimmy Burke, because he was Irish.
Right.
Played Robert De Niro. He had a lot of power in the family, but he was never officially inducted because he wasn't Italian. But it goes back to Gaetano Reina. He was the original boss. He got killed in 1930. Joe Pinzola takes over. He gets killed. Tommy Gagliano takes over then. He dies, natural causes, 1954. And what happens, Billy, is that's where Thomas Lucchese takes over. And that's when the family really becomes powerful. Lucchese, the FBI would name the family after him. He died in 1967. He was very powerful. They were very active in the garment district, Billy. And that's another thing. Like each family would have their own like specialties. Like Gambinos would be in trucking and cement and construction. And Genovese would be a lot in gambling and in rackets like the window scandal, the panels in the window and stuff. And all kind of stuff like that. And Lucchese was very involved in the garment industry and different things like that, Billy. So each family had different specialties that they would be involved in. And then when Lucchese dies, Tony Ducks Corallo takes over. And, you know, he got the name Ducks because he was always ducking subpoenas. Every time he would get subpoenaed or indicted, they couldn't find him. So they called him Ducks. And what happened, how they got him, Billy, they got him in this meeting at the commission, but they also bugged his driver. And they bugged the car and they got all this information. These guys were talking all kind of business in their car. And that's how they nailed him. And then he would have Vicamuso and Gaspipe Castle take over. And that would be a total disaster. These guys they're basically just bought men, should have never been elevated to boss. And they would end up going to jail and the family would be in ruins. And you kind of see, Billy, what happens is RIco is a lot of it. Drugs is a lot of it. But a lot of it is mistrust and backstabbing that caused a lot of it. And, you know, once people started informing, once people didn't trust the people they were working for, they started informing on them and they didn't have the fear of getting killed anymore. So that's when the mafia really started to fall apart. And you could blame it on all of those things: drugs, RIco, mistrust. And they just started breaking the code which was omerta, you know, that you never talk about it.
Right.
These old school guys really didn't, Bill. It really was Joe Valachi was like the first one. And then later on, guys would follow.
Yeah.
And that's what would happen.
Yeah.
You know?
And a lot of it had to do with, you know, the reason that the FBI and you know, Rudy Giuliani went after them as much as they did, as hard as they did, is because it started to become more and more public. You know, these guys were less and less camera shy, so to speak, right? And they you know, they were making a mockery of our laws, and
They were.
and yeah, so
But another thing, Billy, is they were really getting involved heavily into the unions and really corrupting the unions and taking over unions like the Teamsters and the construction unions and hotel and restaurant workers. And then they were involved in the concrete industry, Billy. Like it got to the point where you couldn't build a skyscraper in New York without dealing with the mafia at some level. Especially bottom up, they controlled everything. So once they start doing that, Billy,
you couldn't bring anything in through ports. I mean, everything. Right, everything.
The docks.
Right, exactly.
One thing I want to mention though, Billy, is the relationship the commission had with the other families. So like the 26, when Luciano comes up and he recognizes these 26 families across the country, and there would be satellites, you know, and a lot of this information we would get from Valachi. He told the committee, these are the families. So this is why we know certain families are actually families and some are just satellites. So like the New York families, like Buffalo had a lot of satellite families throughout, like, and then there was others like the five families would have maybe crews in New England area or in Florida, you know. And one of the misconceptions is like the Dallas family was a satellite of Carlos Marcello in New Orleans. The FBI always, when the JFK mob did it people, they always use that as Marcello ran Dallas. That's not true, Billy. Dallas is recognized as one of the 26 families. It always was, going back to Valachi. So it wasn't a satellite of Marcello. Marcello had satellites in like Memphis, Tennessee, in Alabama, places like that down south. So you see the power, like Billy, there really, when the height of the Mafia, there was really not a lot of areas in the country where the Mafia didn't have some type of impact somewhere. You know, even if they didn't have it, because most of the families are located East Coast, let's face it.
Yeah.
Most of them are East Coast. And then you got, you know, Chicago more towards the Midwest, but
Midwest.
Chicago has satellites, like Chicago would have satellites in places like Iowa and Nebraska and places you wouldn't expect, you know?
Yeah. But there was also, you know, I mean, New Orleans had, you know, a family and Pittsburgh. I mean, there were.
Well, Pittsburgh had a family, and we talked about families like Milwaukee.
Right.
Milwaukee had a Dan Hankey, one of our patrons. He knows about this famous boss, Frank Ballesteri. He was a very powerful boss. Milwaukee did a lot of muscle work for Chicago, kind of like Johnny Sack and Sopranos used Tony Soprano's crew.
Yeah.
You know, they would have a lot of impact. You know, the Detroit family,
right?
A lot of impact because Hoffa was based in Detroit, but again, Hoffa was a Buffalino guy.
Right.
So,
yeah.
you know, Buffalino had a relationship with Detroit. Buffalino had a relationship with the commission.
Yeah.
You would have Raymond Patriarch up in Rhode Island. He would have the key relationship with Whitey Bulger in the Winter Hill game, the Irish mob up there in Boston. And he would have a lot of sway with the commission too. And what the commission too, another thing they would do, Billy, is they would like to use other bosses to be like a mediator when there was family disputes. And instead of like people just coming to them and they vote on it, they would use guys like Buffalino and Patriarcha to sit down because they had respects with these other families. So let's just say Philly had a problem with the North Jersey mob. New York would say Buffalino could, you know, sit down with these guys and hash it out because Buffalino had such a great relationship with Angelo Bruno in Philly.
Right.
You know, and that's what they would use. So a lot of these bosses would, from other parts of the country, Bill, they would have certain relationships with the one of the five families, maybe two of the five families, you know, and it would make them very powerful, Billy. Make them very powerful. And then when they would get into the casinos in Cuba and Vegas, of course, you know, they would. Kansas City is a very powerful family, small but very active. Like we talked about, they were the last port where Chicago would send guys to Kansas City to get the skim money from the casino.
Right. Yeah.
So that was a very important family. In Los Angeles, they called it the Mickey Mouse Mafia because they weren't that powerful because you had Mickey Cohen,
right,
gangster there, who had his own family, very powerful, and he had a relationship with families all across the United States.
Yeah.
You know, so that's interesting too, Billy, the relationships that they have.
Definitely, yeah.
And that's all gone now. The commission today, Billy, is strictly a New York thing. They don't have say over other parts of the United States. Those days are gone. They don't have control over the unions, over Vegas. You know, they might control some local unions, stuff like that, but they don't control them at the national level. They don't have control over the concrete industry. They're not in construction like they were, you know?
Yeah. And this is a good thing, Sean. We're not talking about this like
Sure,
it's like
absolutely. Absolutely.
You know, they're pushed out, and obviously, I mean, it was again, like we've said, we're not, you know, these guys aren't heroes.
Well, one thing you see, Billy, is you see this brotherhood that they say existed really wasn't much of a brotherhood.
No.
They turn on each other. You see Carlo Gambino, who was, people say he was one of the most respected bosses. He turned on basically everybody.
Right.
You know, so I mean, all these guys, like they're always in fight, and you can see that, Bill, on just the gangsters today that all have podcasts. None of them get along. They're all fighting with each other. They're going off on each other. I mean, none of them could sit down and have a conversation with each other. So you see why it fell apart.
Right. Sure.
You know, it got too greedy, and you know. But the thing about the drugs, Billy, like when I really started to look into how the Bonanno family dealt with the Sicilian Mafia in Sicily and really brought the heroin into the United States, Billy. They were really the first ones, and the origins of heroin in the United States traces back to the commission, Billy. And like I said, 90%, Billy. I mean, that's unbelievable.
Yeah, crazy,
you know?
crazy. Yep.
And money they were making, and again, the other bosses were upset because Galante wasn't cutting them in; he was cutting them out.
Right.
You know, and that's why they okayed Rastelli to have him taken out.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. This was good. Good episode, Sean. A lot of good information there. Yeah, I mean, and that series, I haven't watched it yet on the History Channel, but I'm
It's
gonna
pretty
watch
good,
it.
Billy. I really enjoyed it. I think like I said, there was a couple things there that kind of contradicted themselves, but for the most part, it was really good. The one thing I liked, Billy, they didn't get into any of the Kennedy stuff. They showed RFK, they showed him attacking the mafia at the hearings and stuff, and they showed
Right.
JFK, but they never said anything about fixing the election or any of that crap.
Right.
They didn't get
Yeah.
into any of that. They didn't talk about Marilyn Monroe or none of that nonsense. They just talked about, this is what we know. You know, this is what the FBI says. This is what, you know, respected historians say. This is what informants told us.
Right.
And, you know, I thought they did a really good job on that. They
Yeah.
got the facts down, and I thought they did a pretty good job. So that's definitely worth seeing.
Good. Good. Now I'm looking forward to it. All right, Sean. Good. Good episode. All right, everybody. Again, as we said at the beginning of the show, go check out our Patreon. Subscribe to us on YouTube. We're getting close to that 500 subscriber mark. And you know, rate, review, all that stuff, comment, and we will see you next week. So that's enough out of you.
That's Enough Out of You podcast is executive produced and written by Bill Rader and Sean Kane and edited by Bill Rader. The That's Enough Out of You podcast and logo are exclusive property of Bags of Chicken, LLC. Any rebroadcast, retransmission, or accounts of this podcast without the express written consent of Bags of Chicken, LLC is prohibited. So don't even try it.